country, under one ruling regime, one ruling power, Israel, that has three separate regimes, legal regimes. There's one legal regime for Israeli Jewish citizens, like me, that have the right to come back. Israel is a vibrant democracy if you're Jewish. I have no problem speaking out, traveling. You know, I live a privileged life there. There's a legal regime for non-Jewish citizens of Israel, especially Palestinians in Israel, that have certainly second-class citizenship. And last month, the parliament passed a law that said that. It's called the Jewish Nationalities Law. That said, you know, non-Jews, they don't say Palestinian, non-Jews are second-class citizens in law. And there's a third legal system for the non-Jewish residents, non-citizens of the occupied territories. So you've got three separate legal systems based on basically race, but really based more on ethnicity, religion, you know, Jewish, Palestinian, in the same country. And that's apartheid. So I'm going to assume that apartheid is not acceptable to any of us, regardless of whether you like my arguments or not. So if the two-state solution is gone, and the one apartheid state is unacceptable, it seems to me the only alternative left isn't a way to go with the flow. You say to Israel, okay, you created one state. You did that deliberately, systematically. You knew what you were doing by your settlements and so on. You created one state. We accept that. Fine. But it can't be an apartheid state. So our task is crystal clear: to transform one apartheid state into a single state of democratic rights, equal rights for all its citizens. Which shouldn't be such a shocking thing for Americans. Oh, democracy. You know, why didn't we think about that before? And somehow the idea of this country being transformed into democracy is shocking for people. I mean, I get thrown out of the window. If I went to Congress, they wouldn't even let me in. It's a shocking idea. And it's you know, and that's interesting. I mean, you're sending your army all over the world to bring freedom and democracy to peoples, right? They don't especially want them. Here come the Palestinians and say, you know what? We wouldn't mind a little freedom and democracy. We're buying. And the answer is no. You can't have it. Everybody else has to have freedom and democracy, or we'll cram it down your throats, but you Palestinians can't, because there has to be a Jewish state. And so you have to live under apartheid forever, which is the bottom line. So it seems to me a kind of an equation that we should be able to break if we work from the grassroots. It's a stark choice between apartheid that exists and a democracy. And now you go to your member of Congress and you say, well, you know, it seems to be a no-brainer, although your member of Congress is probably Republican, so maybe it is a brainer. At any rate, that's, I think, the way we have to frame it. That's half the story. I'm not going to go on too much longer, but what I want to do, I won't get into settler colonialism, is to say not only is this the idea, but okay, what are we talking about? Because if you go talk to your member of Congress, they want a plan. They don't want a nice idea. They hear nice ideas all the time. They don't want an analysis. They're certainly not going to invite me to sit in their office for an hour giving a lecture on human rights and Zionism. What do you want is what they're going to ask you. And if you don't have an answer, they'll show you the door after you finish your coffee. So our answer, this is the program that you have, is detailed. I mean, we still have to flesh it out much more. It's the beginning. But a 10-point program. Now, if we're talking about settler colonialism, the solution isn't two sides get together and negotiate, technically. The solution is decolonization. Now, what does that mean? So I'll go over four. There's 10 points. I'll go over 4 points briefly, just to give you the meat of what we're suggesting. So the first part is to decolonize. We're talking now about one country, a single country, with a constitution that we don't have today. Israel is the only country in the world, except Britain, that has the Magna Carta, that doesn't have a constitution. And that's why we can pass all these outrageous laws we pass, like the Jewish nationalities law. So rather than an ethnocracy that we have today, in which a country belongs to one particular group, we want to change this to a constitutional democracy in which the country belongs to all its citizens. You don't really have a concept of citizen in Israel today. Certainly not in, most of the people living in that Israeli-controlled state are not citizens. So that's the big change. A democracy with a citizenship. Second, the right of return. Palestinian refugees have an absolute right of return. Them and their descendants, because they're part of the citizenry. A refugee and the descendants of refugees are a part of your civil society. Even if they fled or if they've been driven out, they don't lose their status as being a part of that citizenry. So the minute we move from a country based on religion and ethnicity and nationalism to a country based on citizenship and citizens and a civil society, refugees have the right to return and to be reintegrated into society. This is an absolute for Palestinians. They won't even look at a plan, and rightly so. That doesn't include the right of return. Third, individual rights. I don't have to go into detail. It's like in this country. There's one citizenship, one parliament, one set of elections, and everybody has equal rights. You can live anywhere in the country. You can you have integrated schools. You can have complete freedom of movement. In other words, equal rights in every domain of life. Now, this is the hard part, because we're not talking about Kansas, or for that matter, Indiana. This isn't just a bunch of voters. The rest of the world, including the Middle East, is very different from the U.S. In the U.S., taking aside the Native Americans, who have been very, very marginalized, the American population came together in kind of a neutral way, in a country to create a new country. So the state proceeded, and then you got immigration. So the state proceeded, mainly the different ethnic groups. And there were no national groups here except the Native Americans that still have their national rights, and they were seen as nations. That's why they signed treaties with them. But they've been marginalized. In the rest of the world, especially in the Middle East, the national ethnic religious groups preceded the state. States are brand new. I mean, Israel was only 1948. States are new even in Europe. They're only 150, 200 years old. So you have to recognize the existence of the collective groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, national groups that are there, that aren't going to disappear if one state is imposed or develops on them. And therefore, you've got to accept the collective rights of the people that live there. Israeli Jews, Palestinian Arabs, and all the other different ethnic and religious groups in the country that have the right to their own identities and their institutions and their languages and so on. It doesn't give you any privileges, but it's a safety net that says all groups can continue in the country. You can continue to speak Hebrew. Nobody's going to close the Hebrew University. Haaretz newspaper that my son edits, or is the editor of the English language website, can continue to publish. Palestinians have their national culture, even though we're all sharing a common multicultural democracy. That's important also because the Israelis are going to be the minority, the Israeli Jews. And they're not stupid. You know, they ask, the first thing they're going to ask from our plan is, what's going to prevent the Palestinian majority in Parliament from doing to us what we do to them? You know, the tyranny of the majority. You know, what's going to prevent them from passing laws that discriminate or that even throw us out? So all this does, the collective rights idea, is to say that Parliament does not have the authority to enact any laws that discriminate against any community under the Constitution. That's it. It's a safety net. Now Jews can relax, you know, and get on with building the state because they're a legitimate part of the community with the Palestinians. The next stage is, well, what replaces this then? We've decolonized. We've dismantled the structures of domination. We've created a level playing field for everybody. Okay, equal rights. But how does it work? So, you know, I'm not going to get into the whole program, but this is the piece that I think is most hopeful. And that is, we're constructing a shared civil society. In other words, we're all coming together, and over 2 or 3 or 4 generations, a new civil society will emerge. You know, simply from the experience of living together in daily life. And I'll give you one example. I mentioned this to some of my friends before today. Just one example of nation building. In a society in which everybody can live together, go to school together, intermarry, and so on. And that's the World Cup. You know, football in the rest of the world isn't the NFL. It's soccer, as you call it. Well, the World Soccer League, the World Football League Association, is called FIFA. And in the world standings in FIFA, the Palestinian national football team has a higher ranking than the Israeli national football team. Now, neither one have been able to get into the World Cup, which is a huge thing. So that if we combined our resources, maybe we could get it. Can you imagine the impact if we had one national Palestinian-Israeli team in the World Cup? I mean, that's exactly the kind of daily human nation building that builds a civil society, that builds a country. And that's really what we're thinking of. We have other parts of our program I won't go into, but this is sort of the way we see it, like this. In other words, everybody's living in one democracy, one citizenship, one parliament, and so on. But there's a common civil society that everybody shares. Now, not everybody's going to want to live in one common civil society. You know, you have Jews, especially the ultra-Orthodox, but others that want to stay in their own communities, or Israelis. You have Palestinians that aren't ready to jump into a society with Israelis, especially the refugees coming back. So there'll be a time for a generation or 2 or 3 before the civil society starts to take hold. In the beginning, it'll attract young people, it'll attract more secular people, it'll attract middle-class people more, and over time, our hope is that the civil society will expand. In the meantime, you still have your space for your own ethnic, religious kinds of identities. One thing that's very interesting, I'll just mention, and that is that the country isn't only Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. We have 40,000 African asylum seekers in the country that are liable to stay. Israel is not able to get rid of them because of international laws. Well, that's the nucleus of a major community. You've got 150 to 200,000 Russian citizens of Israel who are not Jewish and don't want to be Jewish. That's another significant community that you don't really hear about. You've got the children of foreign workers. It is 350,000 foreign workers in Israel, most of whom go back, but you know, like everywhere, they leave kids, they marry some of them, you know, with the local population. 25% of the kids in first grade in Tel Aviv are not Israeli. They're what you would call illegal immigrants. So, you know, the country is actually much more diverse than we would assume. So that's the concept. That's, you know, the one state as we conceive of it. I think the beauty of it is that it's a win-win. It's not against anybody. It doesn't want to dismantle anything except domination. It doesn't want to destroy, but it wants to transform. You know, we're not going to destroy settlements. We're going to transform them into integrated communities, and then they stop being settlements. So I think that this program is really, and this was the idea, a genuine program that we can bring forward into the community, into the international arena. Not some left-wing program that me and 5 of my friends like. I could do that with my eyes closed. But a genuine program that really you have to take seriously. And I think we've done that.
Well, I think that's enough for us to chew on for a little bit. Jeff, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for this really exciting proposal. We have time for questions. Yeah, Ron.
I never thought of this. Jeff, what's the name of the country?
We don't have a name. I have a joke.
Yeah.
You know, what would be the name of the country that's inclusive? You could call it Palestine. If you spelled Stein, S-T-E-I-N.
There you go.
That works. But I think the name of the country will have to emerge. Because unlike South Africa, see, it's even harder than South Africa. Nelson Mandela could say before the end of apartheid, we're all South Africans. We can't say that. We're not all anything yet. So we've got to create that overarching political and civil identity before we can before a name could actually emerge.
Timothy, and then Dick.
So I did visit the West Bank in 2007 and received a tour about the roads that only Israelis had access
That's
to.
right, the apartheid roads.
Yes, that I assume all the roads that you put on the map
That's
were roads that are exclusively for Israeli citizens. So how have so how has that changed or evolved over the past 12 years in terms of additional infrastructure that in the West Bank that's only accessible to Israeli citizens?
Yeah.
Or settlers?
Right. It's all emerged in that direction. You know, there's been a lot of infrastructural building. Just last week, if you look in Haaretz even, just last week, you know, a lot of these roads are apartheid roads and that only Israelis can drive on. So what Israel's been doing in some places is creating separate little Palestinian roads. In other words, there's 4-lane highways, and then somewhere out there in the hills is a 2-lane, you know, back and forth road.
Dirt.
But now what Israel is, it's just opened a road, for example, right in here between Jerusalem and the West Bank. That's one road, because why build 2 roads? It's one road with a wall down the center. So one side of the road leads with Israeli drivers, leads to Israeli communities. The other side with Palestinian drivers goes to certain Palestinian places. So the idea of apartheid is very much reflected in the infrastructure. You know, the settlements are growing. When the Oslo peace process began, there were 200,000 settlers. When it ended 7 years later, there were 400,000 settlers. Today, there's 800,000. And of course, what we call settlements, it's not really the right word, are really cities. You know, 50, 60, 100,000 people or more. So that this is being densely populated by Israelis, and the infrastructure, the Israeli infrastructure, has the dual function of both incorporating Judea and Samaria into the country. So if you live in Ariel, right here in the center, you're 20 minutes from Tel Aviv. So these are really dormitory suburbs. You know, they're that integrated into, you know, you can live in Ariel, work in Tel Aviv, go to a movie in the evening, and go home easily, you know, on a super highway. Whereas the Palestinians are being confined and really not only isolated, but really confined where they can't move. The Palestinians don't go anymore, Palestinians, from let's say Nablus to Hebron. You know, you end up being confined to your little enclave because it's dangerous and a hassle to move even from one island to another. And so your marriage patterns change, you know. For example, Christians used to marry between Bethlehem and Ramallah. You can't really do that anymore because or between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Because if your daughter goes to live in Jerusalem, you won't see her again because you have no permit to go to Jerusalem. You know, so you end up marrying inside these little islands. It's really distorting and changing the entire Palestinian population. So infrastructure and controls and so on have a tremendous impact on the separate, you know, development of both societies.
The so-called matrix of control. Dick?
So-called.
Yes, I have a question. On your political program, Collective Rights number 4,
That's right.
which you showed us on the screen,
Right.
you indicated that the Constitution will deny the Parliament the authority to enact any laws. Does that mean the Constitution cannot be amended?
Well, no, any constitution could be amended.
Okay.
Any constitution could be ignored for that matter.
But you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at. Look, we're going into this in good faith. And that's been the problem until now. You know, Israel has not been in good faith. So, you know, they've been so-called negotiating, Oslo, and the roadmap, the Annapolis process, John Kerry, I mean, all these things. But, you know, Israel's talking negotiations, but it's never intending. It's not a good faith negotiation because, you know, when I sit across, and it's happened, I sit across from the colonel in the military administration of the West Bank, responsible for house permits, giving Palestinians building permits. So I'm explaining to him, we're having a conversation over coffee, you know, the problems of Palestinians and how it's crowded and it's a human right to have a shelter and they need permits. And he's explaining to me the difficulties of giving permits. It's a very nice professional discussion, but it's not in good faith. Because I know that he's not going to give building permits. I know this is just perfunctory. It's a conversation we're having, but we both know that Palestinians don't get building permits because Israel wants to freeze building in 1967. There's a political agenda. He's not going to say that, and I'm not going to call him on it because that would end the conversation. So we're having this whole conversation that we both know is bullshit. So that's the problem, you see. And so if you go into this kind of a thing, you've got to be specific. That's what we're trying to be as specific as we can about what exactly we're talking about.